I had a really interesting experience that also really deeply affected me. When I wrote the book and made the documentary film, they all came out at the same time in Canada. It was a book tour. And luckily, part of the book tour, I could show documentary. It was a really cool thing, right? The worst place was Second Generation. The worst. Second Generation is an organization of Jewish children of survivors. They were the worst. Why? Well, I went to these places, and how can you do a documentary about how Poles saved Jewish lives? Poles were murderers. Well, I'm not doing a documentary about how Poles saved Jewish lives. I'm talking about the Banya family, who were a mixed group with different motives, and how they took my parents in, how they saved each other's lives, is my personal history story. I am not they wouldn't listen to this. And it wasn't until this old woman put up her hand at the back and showed her tattoo from Auschwitz and said, "Shut the fuck up. Let him tell his story. Who the hell do you think you are?" Because what these second generation kids, and I'm second generation, what these second generation organization was about, I have no problem saying this publicly, is that they were about, for the most part, a reinforcement of their victimhood status and their separation from the rest of the world, and their knighthood, their individual self-knighthood, as being representatives of the most victimized people on the face of the earth, which is, first of all, an extraordinarily dark and exclusionary place to be as a human being, and untrue on top of it. So I was deeply affected. I refused after a while to go to any second generation groups. I wasn't going to talk to them about my book or documentary. There was no way I was going to talk to them anymore after a few of these places. I remember being on a radio show. I think his name was Andy Berry, if I remember, a Canadian. I think that's what his name. He had a talk show. It was a very popular talk show where he would talk about things of the day. So if there was a taxi driver, there's a rash of taxi drivers that were getting killed or robbed in Toronto at the time in the middle 80s, and he had taxi drivers on, talking about, he would do that. So for me, we were doing a book tour, so I had interviews, and he said, so what I'd like is, it's a call-in show, so people will call in and talk to you. We'll ask all, children of survivors, a little big Jewish community here, or survivors, to call in. I said, nope. I'm not doing it. And he said, why not? And I said, don't ask me now, ask me on the air why I'm doing it. He said, great. So he's a very great guy, terrific guy. And I said, the reason I'm not doing it is because this is what happened to me with Second Generation, story I just told you. And I didn't write this book in order to be exclusionary or to say my Holocaust is better than your Holocaust, or for me to have a badge. I didn't have children then. I hadn't even met Eleanor yet. That was a year away at that point. We'd been together for 27 years, but at that point we hadn't met. I said, no, I want anybody who's the child of a parent to call. I think there might be a few children of parents out there. He said, why? I said, because this is what this is about. It isn't about the Holocaust. That happens to be where my parents were. But the truth is that if you were a child of a parent who grew up in the London bombings or any kind of issue, any kind of thing, you're going to deal with, your one thing might deal with is that you invalidate your own pain and suffering because it can't compare to your parents' war stories, wherever you're from, or whatever they went through. And in fact, it might not be that. It might be a whole different thing. And I really have written a book and done a documentary, talking about my relationship with them in the best way I knew how to tell the truth about this, so that people can relate to it, not so that people can be excluded from it. And by asking children, survivors or survivors, to call, it's a way of putting a lie to why I did this in the first place. So we got that. That's what we were talking about. That influenced me and Eleanor a lot.